History is filled with rulers, some wise, some benevolent, but others ruthless. They ruled with iron fists, spreading fear, destruction, and chaos. Their names evoke horror, and their reigns were marked by suffering. Today, we count down the 10 most brutal rulers in history, whose names are forever etched in infamy. These men shaped nations, built empires, and committed some of the most horrifying atrocities ever recorded. Their legacies are filled with blood, and their stories serve as a grim reminder of what unchecked power can do. At number 10, we have Vlad the Impaler. The inspiration behind Bram Stoker's Dracula, Vlad III of Wallachia was infamous for his gruesome methods of punishment. His favorite, impalement. It is said that he left thousands of his enemies displayed on stakes as a warning to others, a feast in a field of impaled bodies. Just another Tuesday for Vlad. Born in 1431, Vlad inherited a land filled with political turmoil and constant warfare with the Ottoman Empire. He spent much of his life in captivity before reclaiming his throne. However, he ruled with sheer terror, ordering entire villages to be impaled, roasted, or dismembered. He would often arrange the impaled victims in patterns to instill maximum fear, and it is believed that over 20,000 bodies once lined the roads leading to his castle. Beyond his brutality, Vlad was also a skilled military tactician. He successfully defended Wallachia against the Ottomans, using guerrilla warfare, scorched earth tactics, and psychological terror. His cruelty kept his enemies at bay, but it also made him one of history's most feared rulers. At number 9, Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible. The first Tsar of Russia, he ruled with paranoia and bloodshed. He created the Oprichnina, a secret police force that unleashed terror upon the people. He even killed his own son in a fit of rage. No one was safe from his wrath. Ivan's early reign was marked by military success, expanding Russia's borders and centralizing power. However, his later years were drenched in blood. He established the Oprichniki, a feared paramilitary force that rode black horses and dressed in black robes, leaving trails of devastation in their wake. Entire towns were razed, and thousands of innocent people were executed on mere suspicion of disloyalty. One of his worst atrocities was the massacre of Novgorod in 1570. Believing the city's inhabitants were plotting against him, he ordered his troops to lay siege to the city. Over 60,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered. In one particularly gruesome act, he tied nobles to sleighs and hurled them into freezing rivers, leaving them to drown beneath the ice. Ivan's paranoia grew so intense that he turned against his own family. In a fit of rage, he struck his pregnant daughter-in-law, causing her to miscarry. When his son confronted him, Ivan bashed his head in with his staff, killing his only heir. Coming in at number 8 is Leopold II of Belgium. Under the guise of philanthropy, Leopold turned the Congo Free State into his personal hellscape. Millions of Congolese suffered mutilation, torture, and death as they were forced into brutal labor for rubber and ivory. His crimes against humanity remain some of the most horrifying in colonial history. Leopold presented himself as a benevolent ruler, claiming his mission in the Congo was to civilize and uplift the native people. In reality, he established one of the most exploitative regimes ever seen. His private army, the Force Publique, enforced quotas for rubber collection through fear and violence. Those who failed to meet quotas were subjected to mutilation, their hands, ears, and feet hacked off as punishment. Families were torn apart, entire villages wiped out, and an estimated 10 million Congolese perished under his rule. Despite international outcry, Leopold maintained his grip on the Congo until the Belgian government was forced to take control in 1908. By then, the damage was irreparable, and the scars of his rule remain visible in the region today. At number 7, we have Joseph Stalin, the ruthless dictator of the Soviet Union who ruled through fear, mass purges, and famine. Stalin's policies led to the deaths of an estimated 20 million people, making his rule one of the deadliest in history. Under Stalin's rule, political enemies were executed or sent to gulags. Harsh labor camps where prisoners suffered from starvation, extreme weather, and brutal conditions. The Great Purge of the 1930s saw hundreds of thousands of intellectuals, military leaders, and civilians accused of treason and executed without fair trials. His secret police, the NKVD, carried out mass arrests, tortures, and forced confession. Even those closest to him were not safe. One of his most devastating acts was the Holodomor, a man-made famine in Ukraine that killed millions. Stalin's forced collectivization policy stripped farmers of their land and food, causing mass starvation. Those who resisted were either killed or sent to Siberian labor camps. Entire villages perished, and reports surfaced of desperate civilians resorting to cannibalism to survive. Stalin also established a culture of paranoia. Citizens were encouraged to inform on their neighbors, leading to countless innocent people being arrested and executed. The Soviet Union became a nation where fear ruled daily life. Despite his brutality, Stalin was instrumental in industrializing the Soviet Union and leading it to victory in World War II. However, his reign left behind a legacy of terror and oppression that shaped the Cold War era. At number 6, Genghis Khan, the Mongol warlord whose conquests led to the deaths of over 40 million people. His army swept across Asia and Europe, leaving destruction in its wake. Genghis Khan's forces practiced total warfare, destroying entire cities and slaughtering their population. His soldiers used psychological terror, spreading fear before even arriving at their targets. Some reports state that he wiped out 10% of the world's population at the time. Entire cities were burned to the ground, and the Mongols famously left pyramids of skulls in their wake. In one of the most infamous instances, the Mongols completely annihilated the Khwarezmian Empire, slaughtering its inhabitants after the Shah defied them. Despite his brutality, Genghis Khan was also an innovative leader. He established one of the most organized military forces in history, with a strict code of discipline and merit-based promotion. His empire encouraged trade, connected the East and West through the Silk Road, and promoted religious tolerance among conquered peoples. His ability to unify the Mongol tribes and create the largest contiguous empire in history is a testament to his leadership. However, his methods of conquest remain some of the bloodiest the world has ever seen. At number 5, Attila the Hun, the Scourge of God, a name that struck terror into the hearts of Europe and Asia. He led the Huns in a series of brutal campaigns, leaving entire civilizations in ruin. During the 5th century, Attila built a vast empire stretching from modern-day Germany to the edges of China. He demanded tribute from the Roman Empire, and when they refused, he unleashed his wrath upon them. Entire cities were razed, and he left a trail of devastation from the Balkans to Gaul. One of his most infamous campaigns was against the Western Roman Empire. In 451 AD, he led a massive army to the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, where he was finally stopped by a coalition of Romans and Visigoths. However, this didn't deter him. A year later, he invaded Italy, sacking city after city, and nearly reaching Rome itself. Attila's brutality was not limited to his enemies. Within his own ranks, he ruled with absolute authority, punishing disloyalty with execution and showing no mercy to those who failed him. Despite his ruthless nature, Attila was a cunning strategist and a master of psychological warfare. His ability to unite the Huns and terrorize two powerful empires solidified his place as one of history's most feared conquerors. At number 4, we have Nero, the infamous Roman emperor who brought Rome to ruin with his madness, cruelty, and excess. He is best remembered for allegedly playing music while Rome burned, but his reign was filled with terror far beyond that. Nero was responsible for the ruthless persecution of Christians, subjecting them to brutal executions, burning them alive, feeding them to wild beasts, and crucifying them in public spectacles. He executed his own mother, Agrippina, and his first wife, Octavia, on mere suspicion of betrayal. His reign saw vast public executions, heavy taxation, and grotesque personal indulgences. Eventually, his tyranny caught up with him, and facing rebellion, he took his own life with the infamous last words, "What an artist dies in me." At number 3, Adolf Hitler, a name synonymous with genocide, war, and destruction. As the dictator of Nazi Germany, Hitler orchestrated World War II and the Holocaust, leading to the deaths of millions. His ideology of racial supremacy led to the systematic extermination of 6 million Jewish people, alongside millions of others, including Romani people, disabled individuals, political dissidents, and more. Hitler's war machine plunged the world into chaos, causing over 70 million deaths. His brutal regime saw mass executions, forced labor camps, human experimentation, and the destruction of entire cities. His megalomania led to the downfall of Germany, and his legacy remains one of the darkest in human history. At number 2, Pol Pot, the leader of the Khmer Rouge and the architect of one of the most devastating genocides in modern history. Between 1975 and 1979, his radical communist policies led to the deaths of over 2 million Cambodians, nearly a quarter of the country's population. Under Pol Pot's rule, Cambodia was transformed into a vast forced labor camp. Intellectuals, professionals, and even people wearing glasses were targeted as enemies of the state. The infamous killing fields became sites of mass executions where men, women, and children were brutally murdered. His vision of an agrarian utopia resulted in mass starvation as city dwellers were forced into rural labor camps, subjected to backbreaking work, malnutrition, and disease. The brutal regime collapsed in 1979 when Vietnam invaded Cambodia, but the scars of his reign remain evident today. At number 1, Mao Zedong, the founding father of the People's Republic of China. Mao's policies led to some of the deadliest events in history. His Great Leap Forward resulted in mass starvation, while the Cultural Revolution purged millions deemed enemies of the state. Mao rose to power in 1949 after leading the Chinese Communist Party to victory in the Chinese Civil War. His vision for China was one of rapid modernization and industrialization, but his extreme policies brought unimaginable suffering. From 1958 to 1962, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, an ambitious campaign to transform China into an industrialized society. However, his policies led to economic collapse and one of the worst famines in human history, with estimates of 30 to 45 million people starving to death. Farmers were forced to abandon agriculture for ill-conceived industrial projects, leading to widespread crop failures. Meanwhile, government propaganda insisted that production was increasing, leading officials to seize what little food remained, leaving millions to die of starvation. As the famine worsened, local officials, fearful of admitting failure, fabricated reports of abundant harvests. The reality was starkly different. Entire villages wasted away, parents were forced to eat tree bark, and in some instances, reports of cannibalism surfaced. But Mao refused to acknowledge the disaster, instead blaming saboteurs and counter-revolutionaries for the crisis. In 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, a decade-long purge of perceived enemies within the Communist Party and Chinese society. Encouraging a radical youth movement known as the Red Guards, Mao turned students into violent enforcers of his ideology. Intellectuals, teachers, artists, and even communist officials suspected of disloyalty were publicly humiliated, beaten, imprisoned, or executed. Countless historical and religious artifacts were destroyed, and China descended into chaos. The Red Guards, given free rein to punish traitors, often tortured their victims in horrific ways, leading to untold suffering. During this time, millions were sent to forced labor camps, tortured, and executed. The education system collapsed, economic productivity plummeted, and families were torn apart by paranoia and betrayal. Mao's cult of personality was so intense that criticism of his leadership was practically a death sentence. Despite the devastation he caused, Mao remained in power until his death in 1976. His policies resulted in an estimated 40 to 70 million deaths, making him one of the deadliest rulers in human history. Today, China's rapid modernization and global influence cannot erase the deep scars left by his rule. His legacy remains a subject of controversy, with some still regarding him as a visionary leader, while others see him as one of history's most brutal tyrants. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more amazing content.